It's more than just steel and gears. It pulls you in and doesn't let go.
Okay. Hello. Steve Salem, welcome to the show.
Oh, glad to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Definitely my biggest guest so far. Such a pleasure to be here with Steve. Everybody file in. I'm just going to make sure everything is all working here while you guys are getting ready. I'm just making sure we're
All right, I'm ready.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. We're not going to be able to, since we're doing this live in studio, we're not going to be able to answer any questions as it's happening. Let me pause this. So you'll have to save your questions till the end. Let me just make sure the sound is working here. Here, say something.
Okay, glad to be here.
Yeah, it should be on. Okay, let's see. Yeah, somebody tell us if the sound isn't working, but yeah, looks like we're good. Looks like we're good to go here. Let me just put the sound levels on so we can see. Yeah, okay. Okay, cool. Steve, thank you so much. You are obviously a legend in our space and also a California legend. We are here in Pasadena, staring out over the San Gabriel Mountains, which have I don't know if you've seen, but there's like a scar in them, which is kind of quite interesting. They're like bald. And I know that when reading about you, your father grew up in Altadena.
Yeah. Altadena is the suburb right above Pasadena on the way up to the Mount Wilson Observatory. So yeah, he moved there in 1929. His father came out from Oak Park, Illinois, to retire. As my grandfather he'd been a high-tech salesman selling X-ray machines, first-generation ones around the world, going to hospitals in China and South America and showing doctors the first time they'd ever seen an X-ray machine. He'd stick his hand under the radiation and wobble it around, and everybody look at his bones, and then he got a big scar on the back of his hand, big oozing sore from all the X-rays blasting it.
Ooh.
And that sounds really bad, but then he lived another 50 years, so everything worked out.
So wow, was it cancer or was it just some kind of weird?
It's basically, it's being blasted by X-rays at the very beginning of this scientific understanding of cosmic rays and the like.
So did he talk about what Altadena was like in the 1930s?
Yeah, a little bit. The impression I get is that Altadena, which tragically is largely burned down on the fire that began January 7th of 2025, it was a pleasant suburb for Pasadena, which was kind of the capital of Southern California in a lot of ways back at the beginning of the 20th century, when Southern California was just kind of a dusty cow town until the 1880s. It got two competing railroads coming in from back east, and started a huge price war. The price of a ticket from Chicago to Southern California fell to $1 a ticket, and all sorts of people flooded out from the Midwest. What was a little different about the first couple generations was they weren't exactly pioneers or settlers or anything you'd think of like that. More it tended to be people who had a little bit of money back in the Midwest and were looking for a healthy climate. Which is one of the things that explains why Southern California is settled kind of strangely. Like right here, we're in downtown Pasadena. Pasadena is about 30 miles inland from, say, the Santa Monica Pier. Pasadena has just about the best 19th century architecture. There's all just these magnificent buildings and homes put up from 1890 onward. Santa
Have you
Monica.
seen the Scottish Rite Temple?
Yeah.
That thing is amazing.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Or I'm just looking at your City Hall out there. It's spectacular.
Yeah. Is
People-
that mission style? It's kind of mission.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
mission-y. Yeah.
Yeah, so people really,
Keep going. I'm just making sure that.
people really put a lot of effort into their city halls back then. But in contrast, like next to the beach, which is now considered the most desirable place to live, it was all laid out in very small plots. Houses might be 900 square feet in Santa Monica and so forth. And that's because people back then were really concerned about how damp the atmosphere was. I mean, I noticed when I moved to Santa Monica in 1981, my parents were very worried about the dampness. And they both moved to Southern California before penicillin came around in 1945. And before 1945, people were terrified of getting tuberculosis. And so Southern California had filled up with people who were tended to worry about their health. And so forth.
Yeah, it was kind of like a health. Yeah, you see that respiratory hospital when you drive through Griffith
Yeah.
Park, and it
Yeah.
makes you think like, yeah, that must be people like, oh, I went out there for the dry air, or whatever it is. Yeah,
So that's why they flooded into Pasadena. Altadena became kind of the suburb of the big buildings of Pasadena. It tended to attract people with some money. Not a huge amount compared to other places, but maybe some artistic orientation. Like my dad used to mow the lawn of Zane Grey, who was the best-selling cowboy novelist of the age, and so forth. Altadena was this kind of middle-class, slightly bohemian suburb. It attracted like very early middle class blacks moved in. My uncle was a classmate in middle school of Jackie Robinson, baseball player.
Really?
Yeah, Altadena was kind of like Southern California's black artists and writers.
Really?
The lady sci-fi writer Octavia Butler grew up there. And it was kind of, a lot of painters, a lot of people who had a little money to indulge their artistic notions. Now, my grandfather, he wasn't interested in that. He was interested in his health. He was convinced that the store-bought food was poisoning him, which in the early 20th century wasn't the most unrealistic paranoid delusion you could suffer
Same
from.
as today. As today.
Yeah, so they bought, probably between my grandfather and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they'd probably get along really well.
What was it back then that they were worried about? Was it like the canned food? Like, was it botulism from canned food? Like,
There
what
was
were
all
they
sorts
worried
of
about?
stuff. I mean,
Not seed oils like today.
yeah, it was kind of like, the notion of making fun of people as white bread and, comedians like Milton Berle and so forth, Mel Brooks would make lots of jokes in the middle of the 20th century about white bread Americans who eat only white bread, drink white milk, eat only vanilla ice cream, and so forth. But there were reasons for that. My wife's grandfather once had a job working in an ice cream factory, and after the first couple of days he came home and said, "The only ice cream we're going to eat in this household from now on is vanilla, because I've seen the quality control they put into the chocolate. You could just get away with a lot more stuff." Like Procter & Gamble made a fortune selling Ivory soap, all white, and they advertised as being 99 and 44/100ths pure.
Yeah.
And that just awed people back then. Today it's like, wait a minute, you're talking 0.56% random crud? Yeah. So that's a lot of where white bread came from, white everything people were really into. My grandfather took it further and just grew a whole lot of his own food, or he put his 4 kids to work on their 3/4 of an acre. Because you could grow, tons of vegetables, and you have your own chickens and so forth.
Yeah, in Altadena. Yeah.
Long growing seasons.
Right. Yeah. No, we get some of our produce from a guy who has a farm in Altadena, like in his backyard.
Yeah.
It's just like, and he's got everything there, and he can grow anything because, right, it's like the perfect.
Yeah. The Altadena dairy was. When I was a kid, it was like once every 6 months on the radio. It was like, okay, the raw milk sold by the Altadena dairy is full of, botulism or something.
Yeah.
It's all being shut down. Throw away all your raw milk from the Altadena dairy. But, now people are back into raw milk. I didn't see the point. I'm kind of a big fan of Louis Pasteur myself.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not a raw milk guy.
Nah.
I like it. I'm a raw milk person.
Right.
I'm a raw milk. It's funny. I grew up in Chicago, and I think we maybe had Altadena milk even growing up, because that was that Altadena milk was like everywhere. I don't know. Yeah. But no, I do like raw milk. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. There's something about it. It tastes better. My theory is that it's not that the pasteurized milk is like somehow bad because it's pasteurized. It's that it's pasteurized because it's old.
Yeah.
Right? It's, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's just kind of bad because it's old, not because it's pasteurized, I don't know. Okay, well, so with regard to what happened in Altadena, which is, I don't know, have you driven around?
No.
Yeah.
No, it sounds horrible.
It's really, really crazy. And there's 2 things left standing. You got the chimneys, so it's all these, you see it's just brick chimneys, and then citrus trees.
Yeah.
Those are the only 2 things that are still there. And other than that, it's just total destruction. They're spray painting on all the cars no EV, because I guess, each car that they were just like bombs, just like blowing up like every, and so what do you make of this? What do you have a sense of, having been a lifelong Californian, do you think this is going to have any impact, or are we going to immediately forget about it in 5 seconds and nothing's going to change?
This set of fires was terrifying in that, everybody in Southern California had long ago gotten used to the idea that, people who were rich enough to live up in the hills on winding, bucolic roads with a view, every so often their houses would burn down or a mudslide would wash it away, but they're rich. And us middle-class people down on the flatlands with just regular gridded streets,
we're safe.
Except
we're
for the earthquakes.
Safe. Yeah.
But this one, Altadena was on a slope, but most of what burned was just regular
grid. Yeah, regular grid.
Same with a big chunk of Pacific Palisades too.
Yeah.
With bad luck, it could have gotten into a lot more area. The firefighters did a great job from the second day of the fire onward. They got overwhelmed on the first day. They didn't have enough people there. By the second day, all of a sudden, there's firemen flooding in from hundreds of miles away, and the winds died down enough, and they did some really impressive firefighting to hold things under control after that. But the first day, boom, that's goodbye Pacific Palisades, goodbye Altadena. It's a tragedy. Does it make a big difference? No, not really. It's, Los Angeles County has 10 million people, and, it's a fraction of 1% of the homes. So, people will eventually rebuild in some fashion. I don't know exactly. Hopefully we think about, newer technological fixes to getting the firefighting resources there on time in the first 10 minutes or so when you can stop something. But I don't know what that is, because we're probably going to have more fires and so on.
Well, because we've got the carbon debt, right? Have you heard that whole
No.
thing? The carbon debt?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
there's probably slightly higher temperatures here than when I was a kid.
No, not the. It's not the climate change.
Okay.
No, the carbon debt thing is the when you don't burn the brush.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it piles up and piles up.
Yeah, I mean, they ought to, but when the authorities go out and set a fire for prophylactic reasons, and then the wind changes and suddenly it burns down a whole bunch of homes, like happened at Los Alamos around the turn of the century, then it becomes this huge scandal and everybody's mad at it.
Right, that's exactly, they can't do it.
So then they go, okay, all right, we need to have, endless environmental studies.
Yeah.
And whenever they do those, then they discover, the San Fernando Valley spine flower or something. It's this tiny weed about that size that looks just like the San Gabriel spine flower.
We need that one. We got to preserve.
One of them is they're in the books as different species, and then you can't do anything. And, we do have to get more serious about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, so, I think Newsom, I had a guy, a firefighter guy, who did a documentary called Hot Shot, and he swore up and down the whole cause is the piled up lack of controlled burns. And Newsom, there's no story that seemingly, of course, nobody writes about in California, which is that he promised to burn 1 million acres and then he didn't do it.
Yeah.
And he lied, and then he only burned 30,000 or something, and that seems to be. But actually, the funny thing is, now that this burned, it's like, well, now you should move to Altadena because it's not going to burn again. You did the debt.
It'll be fine for 10 years or something.
Yeah.
Did you lose a place?
No, we were fine. We're around here, so we're on the good side of the 210, and we did hit, too much Twitter. I was checking Twitter every 2 seconds, and I was like, there's no way it's gonna cross the 210. Because the 210's right here, and then it did cross the 210, but it turned out to just be like a little nothing. So we left when it crossed the 210, and then nobody really was leaving. But
that was prudent.
Yeah, but we were fine. Yeah, speaking of the cause, the winds, you had a great piece about how we should actually call the Santa Anas the Death Valley winds. So can you explain why you said that?
99% of the time I'm not into changing old words because I'm old and I'm way too old to start calling, Kiev, or something like that. Or the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America for that matter. The problem with the famous name, the Santa Ana winds, it's always, everybody always quotes the Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler story, The Red Wind, about how it makes meek wives feel the blade of the knife as they stare at their husband's neck.
Yeah.
All right, it makes it sound like it's blowing from Santa Ana to the southeast. And because that's, you discuss winds from where they're blowing from, not to where they're blowing to. But, and that's a misconception that a lot of people have in their minds. And it's fine unless, unless you're one of the 10 million people in Los Angeles County who got an evacuation warning telling them to flee for their lives, and then like 5 minutes later went, oh, wait a minute, no. Yeah, 9.9 million of you are fine.
Sorry, please disregard our last message.
So if it's a Santa Ana wind, it makes it sound like it's blowing from the southeast, and that means it would blow the fire toward the northwest. And so if you were south of the fire, well, you'd feel like you're fine. Well, no, it's these very dry winds that cause the greatest fire danger typically come from the northeast or from due north, basically from the direction of Death Valley, the hottest, driest place in North America, out on the Nevada border. And so you better be afraid if the fire is north or especially northeast of you. If it's south of you, most of the time, the firefighters have a really good fighting chance to stop it. So yeah, people keep that in mind.
Yeah, we've got it reversed. We're calling them the Santa Anas, but they're coming from the other direction. They're blowing to Santa Ana, not away from Santa Ana, and they're blowing from Death Valley, which, as you're saying, is like the hottest place in America. Yet another thing we do in Southern California that's kind of reversed from everything else. Did you ever read the great, I think it was a New York article called LA Glows? By Larry Weschler or something.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
It was so good, and it's about the light. It's about the weird, like the particulate light around here is apparently completely flipped from everywhere else, and that's why there's a lot of observatories, and that's why that's all the stuff about LA Golden Hour, and it's something about the stillness. There's something about the stillness of the air that makes it so that it's like, apparently what it says in that article is if you go up to somebody with a light meter on a overcast day in LA, and it'll be 100%.
Oh.
Whereas every other place in the world, it'll be like 50. But for some reason here, the light's all weird. Cool. Well, all right. Let's talk about movies because that's where we're going. And you've been doing some fantastic writing about the Oscars. I've loved all your reviews of Anora. I found the one about the architect.
The Brutalist.
The Brutalist. Yes, particularly hilarious. And you begin one of these articles with a quote from Quentin Tarantino where he says the last year for movies was 2019. So why did he say that, and do you think that that's true?
Well, 2019, it was his last year. I hope he makes at least one more movie. But yeah, it was a good year for movies. There's a general conception that they've been in decline since about the turn of the century or so, and it's kind of natural for them to decline because going to the show is this 120-year-old technology, and now everybody's got a theater in their house, and they can, you can turn on the closed captions if your hearing isn't as good as it used to be, and you can stop it whenever you feel like, and so forth. There's just a lot of advantages. But in 2019, there were a lot of good movies made by, first-rate directors. Basically very little interest in wokeness for some reason that year. It was kind of the old-time directors like Tarantino took control that year.
That was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood year?
Yeah, that was a good one. Parasite.
Parasite was great. Yeah, that was good.
Fascinating movie. I've never quite figured out what is it about, but it's so lucid and the scenes are so perfectly shot.
Isn't that the
it's
thing with the
memorable.
Koreans though? It's like
Yeah.
like their horror movies are great and they're really really scary, but it's like they don't make there's no plot. It's like it's just like scary stuff flying out. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so then I can recall like driving along Santa Monica Boulevard in March of 2020 and listening to the radio with all the COVID news, and then it's like, okay, Mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, has just announced that all movie theaters in Los Angeles are shutting down. They'll be closed. And I go, oh, that's kind of big deal if the rest of the world's going to follow that. If the mayor of Hollywood is closing all the movie theaters, and then I said, are people going to come back once they fall out of the hobby and the custom of going to the show? And, to about 25% or so, it appears, the box office has come back maybe 75% or something, but it's not, a healthy situation for movies. And, the movies, they had a really good run.
Yeah, and it seems like it's kind of at the end. So do you think that that's just a function of the business model of it not being able to get in the theaters, or is there something wrong with the sort of talent mechanism?
Well, I mean, I think the Great Awakening definitely hurt movies. I mean, I have a theory, and I don't know how well factually it's based, but that people all talk about, well, Hollywood is super woke because just listen to the speech that the Best Actress winner gave, but on the other hand, I don't think they actually let actresses, make really important decisions in the movie business. But you had kind of a breakdown between, I think the producers have always been kind of the people who have pushed for the social justice themes and so forth. The directors have tended to stay not very woke. It's part of the auteur theory. It's a theory that you need an author and he's in charge of 100 plus people every day, so he needs to be kind of authoritarian. And what does he believe in? He believes in authority, responsibility, he believes in talent, beauty, all of these concepts that the woke despise.
Right, yeah, hierarchy.
Yeah, hierarchy, and
singular vision, non-democratic creative decision-making kind of thing. Yeah.
So, people talk about how woke the movies are, but it's kind of like, the good ones, you look at the 10 best from 2019, not really, not that much. But will we get back to that, or is it just so much more profitable to, instead of making a 2-hour Severance movie where you explain the whole thing in 123 minutes and you find out what it's all about by the end, drag it out over the years. You don't even have to know what's going on when you start it. You can argue about it for 3 years and people still come back and watch. You can do some good stuff there, like Severance is pretty interesting, but I personally miss just the compression, the intensity of, okay, you got to tell this whole story in 2 hours, you got to create a world in 2 hours, and just the bang, 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 revelations that, if you watch like It's a Wonderful Life, just watch the last 15 minutes, how many plot twists there are crammed into this.
Yeah, it was just it was like it was a more pressurized container, and you really had to figure out how to put your, use that as the canvas. Like, it's just such a incredible medium. So this year's movies, the old Oscars, you've reviewed a couple of them. Anora, let's talk about Anora. Man, I hated that movie. So I like.
Why'd you hate it?
Well, I'm trying to find out. That's actually, I don't even quite know why I hated it so much. I really like Sean Baker's previous movies, Tangerine, which is, of all things, a movie about black transsexuals. It's shot on an iPhone, but it's great. It's really good. And then Florida Project, I thought was fantastic. I really liked it. He's got, what's his thing? He's kind of like the Safdies in that he's like, this is about gritty, kind of lower class white people, but it's about kind of the beauty of their lives, right? It's about like the beauty found in the life of not lower class, even white people, just kind of lower class people. And it's like the day to day, and it's shot in this gritty 2003 handy cam kind of way, which is very popular now. Both him and the Safdies both have that same kind of beat. And I'm into it, but this movie, I hated it. It felt like a Disney porno to me. It felt like if Disney made a porn film, this is what it would be. Because it was like trying to be edgy, but it somehow was not edgy at all. It was like completely devoid of anything interesting. But anyway, you had a very interesting take on it. So what did you make of Anora?
I thought it would have been a lot better if it was 30 minutes shorter.
Yeah.
2 hours and 20 minutes for what's sort of a romantic comedy.
Yeah.
Leads to a lot of repetition. There's just a whole lot of people screaming at each other.
Yeah. For very
and then
long
they scream some more and some more. The Russian flathead who's got himself a I'm from the San Fernando Valley, and there's a whole lot of Russians around the San Fernando Valley, and for about 20 years I've been running into it, like this one grocery store, all these guys who look like they done a few years in the Russian army, and now they work security for some oligarch in Bel Air. So the movies have done a good job of there is this big Russian population in Los Angeles now, but this guy was really good as kind of the guy who's actually right for the prostitute, and so that was a good aspect of it. Otherwise,
he was the best part.
Yeah.
I don't know, what's a flathead?
It's basically an assumption that not a large domed cranium, and maybe a crew cut as well.
Okay. Yeah, no, he was the only good part of the movie.
He's kind of a goon, the muscle.
Goon. Yeah, the goon. Yeah. But what was bad about it? Why was it so bad?
Well, I didn't think it was terrible.
Yeah, it's not like the worst movie ever, but right.
They used to make romantic comedies pretty snappy, like Annie Hall, which beat Star Wars for Best Picture, was 93 minutes long. This is 119 minutes long.
It's so weird. Like, why would you make this movie? This should be a tiny movie. This should be in and out. Like you're in the world, you're out of the world. And it just goes on and on and on. And you're right, it's exactly right. It's like all these scenes of just yelling at each other. And it's like, why do we need this? And there was something also just, speaking of auteur theory, I have my theory of why these things are going wrong is, of course, besides the demographic change of who is in charge of the decision making, which is now these managerial people. And beyond that, though, what happens is, if you manage to break through and become an auteur, which is like Sean Baker has, or like Scorsese, he's grandfathered in. You got Paul Thomas Anderson, speaking of the Valley, he's grandfathered in. Once you're grandfathered in, this new tech manager people, they don't have the cojones to tell you no. so now you're just able to do whatever you want, and that's actually really bad. Like, I don't know if that. Do you think that that's true at all? Like the whole thing of like, you know, not Weinstein himself, but that whole kind of those really crazy producers are now gone and they've been replaced by tech people, and therefore there's just no editorial in the system anymore.
Okay, so Scorsese's The Irishman,
Yeah.
3.5 hours.
It was so bad.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by just how much I liked Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa. And if they'd made a 2-hour movie with mostly about Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, okay, I talked about Annie Hall. The reason Annie Hall was so short was it didn't start off just as a romantic comedy. It started off as a rather long murder mystery that Woody Allen had written, and they filmed the whole thing, and then the editor went, you know, Woody, I'm not sure that the murder mystery parts work. What if you just cut all of that and made it a romantic comedy, and you did some jokes for about 10 more minutes to stretch it out to an hour and a half. And yeah, that worked really well.
I didn't know that. That's a great Annie Hall story. I did not know that was the genesis of it. It was like a part of a murder mystery. That's
yeah,
really
Woody Allen made it later on under a different title. I forget.
Yeah, crimes and misdemeanors
Yeah.
or something. Wow, that's yeah. No, so I think we're right on. And okay, so Anora, right? It's just so overloaded. You also had a funny thing about of course we have to talk about the kind of racial makeup of the Valley Jewish girl, who is Mickey Madison. Where did she get that name? And so, yeah, what was your point there? It was like we don't know how Jewish she is, or what was it?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so she works at a strip club, and so some drunken 19-year-old rich Russian kid comes in, and the owner says, "Oh, we got to find the one stripper in this Manhattan strip club who speaks Russian." And so it turns out to be Mikey Madison.
Mikey, sorry, not Mickey, excuse me.
But because she says her grandmother only speaks Russian and so forth. One of the questions that comes up a lot living in the San Fernando Valley is people who are Russian, how Jewish are they? People who are Jewish, how Russian are they? Israelis, are they really Israeli or are they Russian? And so forth. I mean, what's happened is you have General Ariel Sharon, when he went into politics, he said, "Look, I'm a big Russian-looking guy. The Soviet Union is full of people who are kind of Jewish and kind of Russian because there hasn't been that much intermarriage and there's a ton of intermarriage between the two groups. So let's just import as many into Israel as possible," and they all thought Sharon was great, and they made him prime minister and so forth. And then a lot of them got kind of tired with Israel. It's like,
wait, these are non-Jews? These are Jewish, kind of Russian Jews.
Yeah, it's like, you're between 1/4 and 3/4 Jewish,
and
but
Russian.
you
Okay.
grew up atheist.
This is really interesting. This is a great gene flow thing. Okay.
Yeah,
cool,
and then a lot of them, the United States started pushing in the 70s to have Soviet Jews be allowed to move to Israel, and it went all the way into this century. But a lot of them got to Israel and went, this is more Jewish than, what I like is like Miami or Hollywood. that's about the right.
And then suddenly they're Israelis. Like, they're not Russians anymore. Now they're Israelis, which is like a different thing. And they're like treated differently. Yeah, that's hilarious.
So
Yeah.
it's an entire kind of interesting sociological phenomenon.
Right. More proof that the Ashkenazi Jews are not actually the Jews. It's like they're not really, they're actually Russians who are not Jewish at all. It's really funny. Okay, wait. So Mikey Madison is one of these kind of vaguely.
But my thought would be, if it's an expensive strip club in Manhattan, they're probably going to have a tall, blonde Russian stripper working there. It's Los Angeles. Los Angeles doesn't have that many blondes anymore. But a large fraction of the ones they do have some sort of Russian accent. Shown up in great numbers.
Yeah.
I thought that was a little bit unrealistic about the movie. I would have also liked to have seen the rich kid, the Russian oligarch scion, be given a few more endearing traits so that when he abandons her toward the end of the movie, there's some emotional pain to it rather than she just wanted him for his money, because he's always been a zero throughout the movie. Give him something cute to do.
Yeah, you had the great example in your piece of one of my favorite things about movie reviews, particularly from our guys, is like the suggestions of what to do better. And you had this great suggestion, which was he should, when she was figuring out what his dad did, she was Googling it, and she should have stumbled across some silly profession that a Russian oligarch would have, and mispronounced it, which was, well, you're right, that was such a great call. Like, that would have just added a little bit of dimension and a little bit of realistic, like, this is what the world is actually likeness, instead of this really two-dimensional, just like everything's so like funny and Although I will say, the one character that I did really, really like, also besides the flathead, was the Russian mom. She was pretty good, and I know that. I've seen that type of Russian Jewish mother. I've seen that blonde, that exact person, and she's like really scary. Like I feel like that was pretty good. But yeah, the basic problem: so many ideas, so much going on, but no economy. Like cut it out. So all right, let's talk about the other one, which was the Brutalist. Okay. You said in your Brutalist review, the thing that I didn't totally get, and I've heard other people talk about it, there's this Gentile filmmaker who was a child star, what's Brady Corbet, whatever his name is, and he's making this movie, and other people, it seems like what's the deal with the relationship with the executives? Like, what is this?
It's... Okay, so there's basically two main characters in the Brutalist. One is played by Adrian Brody. He's a famous architect who taught at the Bauhaus School and was huge in Hungary before the war.
And this is not a real architect. This is a made-up architect.
This is a made-up one based on a number of famous refugee architects from Bauhaus, such as Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer. Okay, but in the movie, the famous architect comes to America after World War II. He's just barely survived the Holocaust, and he's incredibly poor in America. He has to get a job shoveling coal for 5 years. He's living in a homeless men's shelter for 5 years. And finally, in 1950, this rich WASP industrialist, whose name is Harrison Lee Van Buren, is named after 3 presidents and a Confederate war general.
Like, what? Where do they get this shit from? It's unbelievable.
All right, he hires him to build build this monument to his mother that'll be a church and a library and a swimming pool, and then so forth, and like, okay, but that's actually not how it worked out for the Bauhaus architects. Instead, they all came in the 1930s when Hitler shut down Bauhaus, and so Marcel Breuer, who's one of the Jewish architects, showed up, and he was immediately, when he arrived in America in 1937, he was immediately made a professor at Harvard. And he was given land and money to build one of his modernist houses for himself to live in. And he and Gropius got signed to build this modernist masterpiece for a Pittsburgh industrialist. And, you know, Tom Wolfe wrote a book called From Bauhaus to Our House that documents just how the European modernists completely took over elite architecture in the United States immediately upon their arrival. Now, later on, after the war, none of the surviving architects came to the United States, as they're shown coming in this movie, because they had so much in the way of commissions back home, because their own continent had been blown up by World War II.
Got tons of money to
and they were on the winning side, whether they were in the Soviet zone or in the capitalist zone.
Yeah, either way.
They were big winners.
Yeah, right,
so,
right.
I mean,
very well
so
said.
some of the, the modernist architects like Erno Goldfinger, he'd moved to England and married a rich woman in 1930, and then he got huge numbers of commissions to do things like the British Communist Party headquarters and all of these high-rise public housing projects that are so hilariously ugly that they're kind of cool, and they come back into fashion, and everybody in Notting Hill wants to live in a Goldfinger tower. Now, Goldfinger was hated, his designs were hated so much by the conservative Ian Fleming that Fleming named his most famous Bond villain after the architect. But yeah, the Brutalists and other modernists did very, very well for themselves back home in Europe after World War II. So historically, none of this makes any sense. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the movie was better.
Right. So it's just kind of completely this made-up weird history. But so what were you saying, though? I've heard a couple people talk about, like, the relationship between Courbet and then the executives. Like, what were you said something about it in there. Like, what were you saying?
I mean, all right, so the Brutalist is...
You were saying they don't trust him? Or is this right? Yeah, go.
Yeah, the Brutalist is beloved by critics who don't seem to know anything about the history, but it's got the right good guy and the right bad guy.
Yeah.
The good guy is an immigrant, a refugee, an artist, he's Jewish. The bad guy is a rich WASP American who tortures the good guy even after giving him a commission. And I'm thinking, and Courbet's given a lot of pretty frank interviews, like about just basically how poor he is after like making 3 movies now, and you know how he lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, and all his friends in art house movies live in 1-bedroom apartments, and I'm sure he's telling the truth, and basically how much he hates the executives in the movie business who have the money and make the decisions about green lighting and so forth. And I'm like thinking, well, demographically, who tend to be the decision money men in the movie business? Well, did this guy just make an anti-Semitic movie about how much he hates Jewish movie executives, and then he just flipped it around. So
Yeah.
it's about how much everybody should hate WASP industrialists, and
Yeah.
and nobody's noticed that.
I think that's exactly what happened.
Alright.
I think that's probably exactly what it was, and he he perfectly flipped it in some way. Yeah, I think that kind of stuff happens a
Yeah.
lot.
Now I came away from it going, I mean, that all would have been fine if it was like as good a movie as everybody says it
Right,
is
right.
artistically.
Yeah.
But I came away going, yeah, the Jewish movie executives, they kind of know what they're talking about, and this guy's not really that good
The Jews were correct.
at putting the camera in the right place.
Yeah, well,
and
his
so
movies
forth.
don't make money, as you said, also. It's like, right, it's like, of course, he's got a contentious relationship with them, and his movies just aren't very good, right? I mean, it's like, I don't think I've ever seen any of his first movie was also kind of one of these, like, Hitler as a child thing,
Yeah.
which I didn't even see. Yeah. Okay, so yeah.
So the Brutalist is extremely long, extremely slow-paced, kind of lacking in plot twists. It's just sort of like something goes wrong on this big project, and then everybody gets mad at the heroic architect and is mean to him. And that's all that happens. And then at the end, you get kind of a plot twist, and you find out that it's kind of the architect's revenge, that his building is probably apparently supposed to be ugly as his revenge. He made it look just like the concentration camp he was locked up in. And so that's kind of his revenge on the Gentiles of America or something.
Well, and maybe that's why the movie's bad, because it's the same thing. He's saying this is the bad movie. Also, yeah, you have a good description in there of a scene that goes on too long. And it's just nobody's cutting these things. And it's like he says, I notice this all the time. And the example you use is it's like he says, I have to wake up early in the morning. And then it like shows him waking up, and then it shows like the maid putting the towel, and then he puts on the towel. And it's like, why are we seeing this?
Yeah, There's a shot of a maid carrying clean towels to the guest room that goes on for about 20 to 35 seconds. And after like a second and a half, I'm going, okay, the maid's coming with the towel. That's established. Well, she's still going. She's trudging onward and onward. Okay.
Yeah, why is she still here? Yeah, no, I notice that all the time. That really is the thing of modern movies. It's like there's shots in there that are just pointless. It's like there's shots that are just there, and it was like, why is this here? Yeah.
It could be that pacing is slowed down due to the rise of 10-hour quality television show, and everybody was so stunned to discover that you could take things slow and make a lot of money that way. And so, the pressure to cut and speed things up is gone. But I get bored fast.
Yeah,
I like concentrating real hard for 2 hours.
Yeah, and not having, once you enter the 2.5 hours, there's got to be a really good reason for that. Okay, so how about any movies you've seen recently that are good? I know, it doesn't really exist anymore. I can't think of it. I wouldn't even know how to answer that.
I mean, I liked last year's, Barbenheimer to do.
Yeah.
Those paid off.
Yeah.
It's possible to make good movies these days. There's a bunch of them out there. A movie I haven't seen, but my son swears could turn out to be the most influential movie of the 2020s when, the hot director of 2040 is being interviewed, and they're going like, well, did you watch Oppenheimer? I go, yeah, me and my friends, we went and saw it. It was good. But the movie we watched over and over and over again that has really set my direction in life as an artist is Hundreds of Beavers.
Oh, what is Hundreds of Beavers?
It's like a cross between if Buster Keaton and Chuck Jones had made a black and white silent movie about a drunken guy in the 1850s who's gotten all the beavers in Wisconsin mad at him, and they're chasing him around in these slapstick stuff. And apparently people go to the theater and it's just, it's like Rocky Horror in 1974 or something. It's the funniest thing to go see with a bunch of people who think it's funny.
What? Okay, well, I gotta see Hundreds of Beavers.
Yeah, I'm not gonna I haven't seen it, so I'm not gonna promise it, but it's kind of like, I mean, when they make Oscars, when they give out Oscars, it's impossible to know what movie in the future is gonna really grab the next generation.
Yeah, right.
I'm all fine with like, give it to, the King's Speech type movie.
Yeah, the prestigious, that's kind of,
that's
right,
fine. And then
Yeah.
10, 12 years from now, we'll hear from the younger generation what really got
What
them.
really counted? No, that's totally right. But I think now all these things are garbage. I mean, I think it's going to be just a drought, for whatever reason. Okay, in the last 30 minutes here, let's talk about your writing. So,
Okay.
in reading a lot of your writing for this, it's not just fantastic writing. You more than anybody else, and and not to like put you on the spot, but it seems like your writing is really, really good internet writing. It's good for the internet, which you don't see that a lot. You don't see people who understand the format of writing for the internet. Is that something, because you've been doing this for, you're maybe the original funny but also super insightful internet writer. Is this something that you think about at all, or?
Well, I mean, I think about something that's attributed to the mid-century New Yorker writer A.J. Liebling, whose statement of personal pride was, yeah, there are writers who are better than me, but I'm usually faster than them, and there are writers who are faster than me, but I'm usually better than them. So you want to be somewhere on that curve. Now, I'm not as good a writer as A.J. Liebling was, but the internet definitely pushed the curve toward speed. And, so, like, I read Steven Pinker's book of advice on writing, and it's excellent work, and Pinker's a better writer than me, but I am a little faster than him. So, I mean, he gives all sorts of great tip, like, when you get it finished, then set it aside and go to bed, and then reread it the next day, and you'll see all sorts of things you can improve. And I'm like, yeah, that is true on the occasions when I do it. But on the other hand, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and if I hit send right now, people will be reading it in the morning while I'm still asleep, and something will be happening.
It's kind of, I'm the exact same. The internet, the immediate gratification does kind of like guide it guides the speed, right?
Immediate gratification. That is a massive temptation.
Yeah.
I think one of Pinker's tips was read it out loud, in the tradition of Flaubert and so forth, and that's great. But I never get around to that. It's like right now I'm recording the audio book of my anthology, Noticing. So it's my greatest hits collection going back to really we have one paragraph from 1974.
Wow.
One
paragraph.
Yeah, it's like a letter I wrote to National Review in 1974. And yeah, it pretty much adumbrates, my worldview over the last 50 years or so.
Yeah.
Even though I was only 14 at the time.
Wow, really?
But-
Okay, that's funny.
Finally reading my book out loud, because I'm narrating it, because I know what the jokes are and what's supposed to be facetious and so on. But I also notice, like, I would have written this a lot differently, like if I knew I had to speak it out loud, because like I'm addicted to alliteration, but saying things like my alliteration addiction is kind of terrifying when I see it come up in the line, and it's like, am I going to be able to get my mouth around that phrase?
The words.
And so forth.
Yeah.
So, all right. So my philosophy is I have 4 priorities from foremost to least. The first is what I write should be true. Second, it should be interesting. Third, if possible, it should be new. And fourth, if I can manage it, it should be funny. You can't leave out the earlier ones, but to go for funny or new or something like that. I think that's served me well over the years. But it's still a learning process. I think I got pretty good at blogging from 2001 onward. And with blogging is a pull technology. You put something out there and people can go to your website if they're in the mood, if they've got a few minutes, they can glance at what you've written and see if it feels like something they should read. And with blogging, I could go for the immediate gratification, like boom, okay, it's out there. And then I go and look at it and go, oh, well, actually, I could add a joke to it. Boom, it's out there. Oh, crap, look, my grammar is horrible. Fixed it.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I'm starting to go like, well, what percentage of the people who are going to read this saw
the good one
the
versus
bad
the-
grammar?
yeah.
5%. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm putting most of my emphasis on Substack.
Yeah.
And it's been, I started it in June of last year, and I'm doing well on it, and the money's good. But I've got, but it's a push technology. It's like, okay, you write something, and then you hit the button, and it sends emails out. All right, and you're saying, okay, I fixed this enough that, I'm now in your email box, and you should pay attention to this right now, because it's done. And that's a little harder for me to adjust to after the pull model.
So
of
you don't,
blogging.
well, but how many people, because I treat the Substack actually as a poll. I do the shadow editing after I go back anyway. I just treat the email as like a notification. I don't expect people are going to actually read it in their email inbox. I always assume they click and then they come to Substack, and then I always edit afterwards. Because I've also been writing for the internet forever. I mean, I started out with LA Weekly, and I was shocked. I wrote for LA Weekly for 3 years. They shadow edited all the time, which was, you really shouldn't do that, right? I mean, like as a paper of record, but they did it all the time. There was always, they changed one word and, let's switch that up, and no correction issued, it was just like, it was a living thing. But what percentage of people do you think actually read those Substacks in the inbox versus going to the thing? What I do is I like to listen to them because they have the great AI voice, but yeah.
All right, well, I should definitely try to get that into my head. It's like, okay, Steve, go ahead and just send this out now, and then you'll be inspired to actually make it pretty good. Because with Substack, I want to get the number of posts I send out a little higher, maybe 50% higher, because
How many do you do now?
I probably do 8 a week or something
That's
like
a
that.
lot.
Yeah, but in my blogging days, I was probably at 15 to
A week?
18 posts a week. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I was younger and smarter. I could probably,
Hugely prolific.
I could average about 3 a day.
Wow.
At my peak, but yeah, a lot of it's just not letting myself get daunted by like, well, I really gotta put a lot of effort into this
Because it's
one.
going to them. Because
It's going to them, and that's what they'll look at.
Yeah. I don't know. It's actually a really. I have no idea. I maybe they do read it in the email.
I don't know either. I was in the marketing research business for many years in the 20th century, and when I went over to writing at the turn of the century, I just sort of like, I'm not going to worry about marketing research anymore. I'm just going to put stuff out there, and people find it or they won't find it, and so forth. So I'm just I'm real hit or miss about those kind of questions. Other people are very careful about optimizing.
Yeah. Which I'm with you. Everybody's always like, oh, you need to have this formula. It's like, just focus on the creation, and you'll be fine. Basically, make sure it's.
That's my view. It's I'm not gonna go. Okay, all right. I gotta write something about Trump and Musk.
Yeah.
SEO. I have to have five posts every week saying something about what Trump and Musk said within the previous 12 hours.
Yeah. Right.
And that actually seems to work, I think, in terms of readership, but. The inspiration isn't always there.
Well, and it should be, as you said, the four levels. It was true. It was interesting. New, funny. So I guess new. That would go in the new category, but that's 3. The true should be number 1.
Yeah,
I would say.
Saying something, so, I mean, I do a fair amount of, current politics stuff, but, I'm not as fanatical about that topic as a lot of people on the internet are.
Yeah. I mean, everybody seems to be really, really very. Like they want to keep the high of Trump going, and it's like, all right, let's talk about other stuff now. Like we did the job, All right. Well, you had a piece. I did want to ask you. You had a piece on.
Oh, let me jump in here.
Oh.
So to identify where to read me, my Substack, stevesaylor.net.
Yes.
One word for Steve Saylor. Saylor is spelled not with an O, but with an E. S as in Sam, AILER, .net. And my Twitter account, which is doing well. I'm up like at 160,000 followers. Yeah. I mean, ever since Musk liberated in 2022, it's escaped a lot of the shadow banning that held it down for a long time. But that's Steve Saylor with Steven Saylor separated by an underscore, as usual. I'm done poor branding at like making things consistent. But anyway, so that's a couple places. You can also find me twice a month in Talkies Magazine, TAKI. mag.com. And, lately, I'm showing up in various print outlets like the Claremont Review of Books and so on.
Nice. Yeah, and so just so people know, your Substack is, you have a custom URL.
Yeah, that's Musk. Musk is, it drives them crazy that people go from Twitter to Substack, and maybe they don't come back to Twitter for an hour or two. So he wants everything to be on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, he declared that war when they started their notes there.
Yeah.
That was when he declared that. And you used to be able to get, with the big piece that I had, the biggest one I've ever had, it got like 1 million views, the link on Substack.
Oh.
And you would never have that now, you know, and because that was before the shadow banning of the links, and now if you put a Substack link, it'll get 2 views, you know, because he's throttling it. Okay, so do you want to stop now, or do we got 10 more minutes? Okay, cool. All right. What I wanted to ask, so you had this post about Brian Riedel, who is one of the other movies that you had discussed was this Maria Perez. What is it called? Amelia Perez. And it's about a transgender, and the transgender later in life, he came out, but he is right-wing. And so that sunk the promise of the movie. And you had a good piece titled, "Why Do Male to Female Late Stage Transgender People Switch? Why are they always right-wing?"
Yeah, they're not always, but a lot more than everybody on the left and the right assumes. All right, so this Amelia Perez movie got 13 Oscar nominations, as many as like the Fellowship of the Ring got. All right, so it was the front runner because it's about this Mexican cartel drug lord who then decides, that he was assigned the wrong gender at birth and he's really a woman. And so they got some Spanish actor to play him who, at age 45 announced to the world that after long discussions with his wife and his child, he must announce who he truly is, a lady. All right, so that's the guy who was playing the transgender character. He is, and so the Academy, to be ultra woke, even though it's 2025, they nominated him for Best Actress.
Right, because now they've switched. I do want people to understand how crazy that is, because they used to do that in reverse. They used to do, if you were a trans or like cross-dressing character, you were nominated as your...
Yeah, they did,
They didn't nominate
Dustin
you as the opposite
Hoffman
thing.
and Tootsie is nominated for Best Actor.
Yeah.
Same with
Best Actress.
Julie Andrews, Barbara Streisand.
Now they have to nominate you for the other.
And the one where somebody was always the opposite sex was Linda Hunt won the Oscar in The Year of Living Dangerously, playing a half Chinese, half Australian male dwarf. And she's real good at it. She's a kind of a dwarf herself, and it's crazy casting, but it worked. But they gave her, they nominated her for Best Actress. Okay, now it's 2025, so they nominate this guy who had a long career in movies as a leading man in Spain, and then about age 45, he's like, oh, actually, I'm really a woman. Okay, but then, so this was going to be a real stick in the eye to Donald Trump. We're going to give a transgender, an X-Man, the Best Actress award. But then it turned out that somebody looked up all his old tweets, and he's like, oh, he's another right-winger. He has irreverent things to say about George Floyd. He seems to like Trump and so forth. So now it's like, okay, Amelia Perez, not gonna win anything.
Yeah, it's out.
It's
done.
This guy is dragged it down. What kind of, he's a right winger.
Yeah,
all right, but the question is, well, if you've been paying attention to this, like I have for a few decades, it's an awful lot of people, guys who became fairly famous before they decided at 25 or 35 or 65 that they were a woman, tend to be from the right. I mean, one of the first characters to do this, I read his memoir of his sex change about 30 years ago, was the British journalist, historian, travel writer, James Morris, who then announced he's now Jan Morris. And Jan Morris was always this kind of Kipling-esque celebrant of the British Empire. His biggest book was a history of the empire at its peak for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And, you know, he's a big adventurous guy who, he brought down the news from Mount Everest that Hillary and Tenzing had done it. It was the big scoop of the 20th century on Fleet Street, because it came down, you know, the Times of London ran it the morning of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation.
Huh.
And he's basically a conservative, and
Wow.
but he just decided at age 40, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and that's because I always felt like a little girl on the inside. And there's no evidence that he felt that way when he was volunteering to be a British Army officer, or just leading this extremely adventurous, highly masculine life, marrying and fathering 5 children, and so on. I mean, I could go through a lot of examples like this. There's the economic historian Donald Deirdre McCloskey, who's very ultra-libertarian, and there's a funny article from the New York Times in the 90s, before all this stuff got kind of censored, where they're interviewing his mother, and she says, you know what I like about Deirdre is, you know, despite all of the stuff about him being Deirdre now, it's his steely masculine mentality. Reminds me so much of his father. And he's like, Mom! But yeah, you can go on and on. How many more are there? I mean, there's also, you know, there's various
Jenner,
Navy
right?
SEAL. Bruce Jenner. It goes on. It's all right. Now, there's a different type of male to female transgender. It's typically somebody who, from age 3, was an extremely effeminate little boy. Who, I mean, I knew one when he was growing up, and you know, I can remember on Christmas, some little girls, he was playing with some little girls with their new toys, and they go, oh, hey, these are girls' toys. Why do you like girls' toys? And he goes, oh, I only play with girls' toys. That's just the way I am. And it's like, yeah, he always was like that. Mm-hmm. All right. But those people, the effeminate little boys who grow up to be very effeminate homosexuals usually, you know, they're really not that often the culture, the people coming up with the ideologies. Mm-hmm. It's these other guys, and who are highly ambitious, you know, and they're fierce. I mean, I called the X-Men the SEAL Team 6 of cancel culture. Mm. You know, I had McCloskey and Lynn Conway and Andrea James coming after me, and a bunch of people I knew.
Those are all trans?
Yeah, wow. all like 160 IQ
the X-Men,
professors.
Yeah.
You know, they seemed, this was about 20 years ago, a professor at Northwestern, J. Michael Bailey, wrote a book called Man Who Would Be Queen, and said, okay, there's this big cause that they don't tell you about for why somebody, you know, long into life, after he's fathered a few children or something, decides he's really a woman on the inside. And it's called a sex fetish called autogynephilia.
Yeah, right.
And it's, you know, involves dressing up in your mother's clothes and masturbating in front of the mirror and so forth. But it goes along with being heterosexual, desiring women, and it goes, and generally my sense is, and this is going to be a critique of people on the right, is that the guys who go through with all this, rather than just occasionally, you know, have a transvestite night out or something like that, who are so into their fetish that they want the whole world to admit it, that to do that to your wife and kids, you got to be really kind of self-interested, kind of a selfish person.
And that's more right wing.
Yeah, and that's what you don't see. I've never seen is like some nice progressive NPR announcer with an indoor voice and so forth going, okay, when I'm coming back on Monday, I'm going to be a woman. No, it's like, if it's guy on the radio, it's like Bob Turr. It was like Chopper
Right.
Bob, the guy who like got, the OJ footage and all the best helicopter TV coverage.
Yeah.
And then you could hear him like, occasionally punching his co-pilot, his wife out on the air.
Yeah. Because your point is that right-wing people are generally more self-interested than...
Not necessarily, but yeah, it's kind of, it's,
There's something so weird about it.
yeah, they've done interesting studies on research, on like muscularity. If, what they found out was more muscular men tend to have a self-interested point of view. They think it's kind of like they're going to vote, say, for a candidate who's going to put more money in their pockets. Now, sometimes they vote for the left. If you're a union guy and a windbreaker, a little beefy union guy. Jimmy Hoffa tells them to vote for the Democrats. He's going to vote for the Democrats. It's an interesting question whether that's just all nature or nurture, or whether that's all nature, is it genetic, or does nurture matter? About 10 years ago, I said, different political parties should probably promote the kind of exercise. The Democrats should promote jogging, make people aerobically fit, and the Republicans should promote weightlifting. And it seems like over the last 10 years that the cultures have kind of moved in that direction without any guidance from above or anything.
Right, that's true. And it's also like, Nike, which became kind of the ultimate leftist brand, is at its heart at running. That's a running company. And it's true. It's like the jogger, the people who do the ultra marathons. They all have this left coding. Right?
Yeah. 1974 was probably about the peak of the jogging craze, and it was probably the nadir of weightlifting. It was just bizarre to think of people lifting weights. The Democrats had like their biggest sweep of the House in 1974 after Watergate and so forth. And then a few years later, it's kind of like, I can remember, I was in Rio de Janeiro in 1978, and I met a dwarf who was a bodybuilder. He was a real nice guy, and I told him, and he always oh, you're from Los Angeles. What about Muscle Beach? And I go, oh yeah, I think that's coming back into fashion, because there's this guy named Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh, Arnold! He's really excited about it, and you didn't hear much about lifting for a while, but it's just starting to turn. And, but 6 years later, when Rolling Stone magazine ran a feature story on Arnold Schwarzenegger, they made sure to include a paragraph explaining that under the United States Constitution, he's not eligible to become president.
All right, last question, and then we'll wrap up here. This is on the same exact topic. Just a syntactical question. So I did notice that you say she. You say she to talk about the trans. So what's your take on that? Do you say she or he, or how do you decide? Or the black, the capitalizing black. What do you think of this?
I try to be lucid. So I've created the term X-Man to
It's good.
Partly because it's got this, comic book
Yeah, it's
science
hilarious.
fiction
It's like,
aspect to it.
I can't believe this hasn't caught on. It's perfect.
It's the science fiction aspect. I mean, Robert Heinlein wrote a transgender story in the 1950s, All You Zombies. I'm not sure whether he felt interested in himself or whether he felt like, yeah, my audience seems to be interested in this kind of thing. He paid a lot of attention to his slightly autistic audience before anybody else did. But yeah, I mean, Silicon Valley is full of X-Men,
Oh, yeah.
computer programming, etc. It's, so yeah, I usually say he.
Oh, so you do say he.
Yeah,
thought
I
in
would
this
probably,
one it was like
probably
she.
say he for this guy who
Yeah.
who was going to be the best actress. If some kid who was, super effeminate from age 3 wants to be called she now, I'm like, yeah, that's okay. You are pretty much what everybody thinks you are. You don't have this whole covered up story that you've been an activist to cover up this autogynephilia fetish, and it's been mentioned twice in the New York Times in the entire 150-year history of the New York Times.
Yeah.
Because they don't want it, and they're scary activists. So I'm more sympathetic toward the ultra sissy boy who wants to be a drag queen or something like
It's
that.
funny how this dialectical thing crept in, though. It's like this didn't. It's like this is exactly when people talk about the dialectical trick of raising the point, and then it's like, oh well, there's 2 groups, and they win the territory because now it's like, oh, there is now some we can call she, but now there's these other ones. So that's why I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm always scared of these things.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the
Yeah.
high IQ autogynephilic X-Men
Yeah.
type. I went to MBA school with a guy that I fell out of touch with, and then 30 years later, I'm looking in the Washington Post, and it says, it says that he is now the highest paid female CEO in America. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why. He was utterly brilliant. It was kind of obnoxious too, because he looked down upon everybody else in the class, but then he probably was justified, and this guy's out there at 160 IQ, and he told me in 1981 he was going to make his fortune in outer space. And I went, yeah, outer space. Yeah, I read all those Heinlein books too. And then he invented satellite radio. And then he made a second fortune curing the children he fathered of some rare disease, and he made a bundle off that as well. So he's like the science fiction hero. So yeah, it's an entire type that nobody who follows the mainstream media has any clue about, that there's this pattern out there.
Yeah. I think we disagreed on the woman, the person who's the Minnesota, the highest paid female ever founder. Who is that? Remember?
I don't use the name because I knew him personally in 1981, but it's not hard to track down. A person who's made a big impact on our culture. You can look up Howard Stern called him and his funny joke, and called him Martin Luther Queen and so forth.
Interesting. Okay.
So, but I have this rule that if you knew me in private life, I'm going to hold back from going.
No, yeah, I think we're actually maybe talking about different people. I was talking about remember the person. I think that you were saying it's actually a woman, and it's It's, what's her name? It's like the medical licensing thing.
I think she's.
You think that's a woman?
Yeah.
Who is it? It's
a billionaire who runs a
billionaire health
software company.
I think it's a
I
guy.
think that's a woman.
I think
she
it's
is.
gotta be a guy. Because they would put her up more if they were. They're searching. The whole reason why Elizabeth Holmes happened is because they wanted it to happen. So
Yeah.
if she was real, I feel like we would have heard about it. I can't find this person. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve Saylor, thank you
right.
so much. Anything to say before you're gone? Is it stevesaylor.net or stevensaylor.net?
Steve.
Steve.
The problem with the name Stephen is it's hard for people to remember whether it's spelled with a V or a PH.
Right.
So if I drop the N off the N, then it's got to be a V.
So stevesaylor.net. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah.
More things? All good?
No, that's real good. So thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
having me
Thank
on.
you so much. This was great.
Okay.
I'm going to stop the